life, every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray.
All right, we are live here on Facebook to review the January numbers for real estate in the Denver metro area. What did the data tell us? Again, Brenna and I do this every month because we want to be your resource for the right information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. People, really kind of sharing whatever narrative that they want, and we want to make sure that we are the resource for the actual numbers. What does the data say? Because the data tells a story. It's our job to kind of interpret that story so that we can help buyers and sellers make the best decisions. And it's been a wild market over the last year, to say the least. So, what are your thoughts there, Brenna?
Yeah, I think in some ways January followed suit with typical Januaries, to where it usually takes people a couple weeks to get up and going. We actually didn't see that as much in 2020, but definitely felt that in 2021, and that's reflected in the numbers. And the story is not astronomically different. There's a few little tweaks that are different, but I think the things that we've been talking about for the last year are pretty consistent. And the main story that continues to be something we all talk about is just the incredible lack of inventory.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, right? Because we look at the limited amount of inventory, and the last year we had a record year for number of homes sold.
Yep.
So, well, that means that more homes came on the market last year than the year before and the year before that. So homes are coming on the market. It's just the pace that they're moving under contract and what they're going under contract for, and the limited amount of options is dramatically impacting the market right now.
Absolutely. So we do have those new listings every month, but the pendings just outpace that, or the under contracts. So when we talk about active, it's how many current we have, or our reserve, if there is any, and we're very limited on that.
Yeah. So that's the numbers will kind of show out what's going on. So, Brenna, do you have a slide to share? Or do you want to jump in to something else first?
No, I can pull up my slides. So let me know when you are sharing, and we can kind of walk through some of this on a high level.
Okay. So I don't have the request hasn't come up for sharing your screen yet.
Oh, that's important.
Side note, your home office looks really amazing. You did great work.
Thanks. My husband built my shelves for me.
Not technically. They were a kid. I put them together. It's not nearly as impressive as somebody building them.
Well, use a screwdriver.
Yeah. So for those of us that wear glasses, might be visually impaired, can you make that a little bit bigger? I just want to make sure it's completely visible.
Yeah. How about now?
That's better. Perfect. So let's talk about the highlights, Brenna. What were the highlights here for this year?
Yeah. So again, this is all relative. So we say that January was a slow market. So the days in MLS were up 14.3% month over month, which is a big jump. And the sold listings were down 38%. So those are both big swings. The thing I think that still kept it feeling incredibly competitive is that active listings were also down 10%. So we were already very, very low, and now we just dropped 10% more. So, I mean, it makes sense that we dropped in sold listings because there's even fewer homes available. Days in MLS a little bit up. For me personally, I felt like a kind of a tale of two halves for January. The first 2 weeks of January were very, very slow, and still slow. Offers coming in over asking, multiple offers, everything like that. So it's not just like all of a sudden we snapped our fingers and the kind of feeling of the market was different. But as far as number of homes going under contract, we really felt a slowdown those first 2 weeks of January. And then it really switched and January sped up. So obviously it wasn't completely able to catch up to December in those last 2 weeks, but I'm anticipating that we'll see a bounce back in February that mirrors more of that second part of January, which again, and we'll show you, is pretty on trend as far as, the place that they are on the graph might be different, but the shape of the graph as far as going up and down is pretty consistent with what we see over year for this first part of January.
Yeah, the seasonality is still holding true. The numbers are just varied. And, the active listings being down 10%. Now that's 10% month over month. So that's 10% down from December to January.
Yes.
As we get into the specifics around how far we are down in inventory compared to this same time last year.
Yeah, and that's over 50% year over year, and we'll get into that. So that's a massive jump. But, if you think about the time of the year with the holidays, it makes sense. People are kind of getting out of that holiday fog of Christmas and New Year's and anything else that's wrapped in there, and not necessarily wanting to jump to put their house on the market. So that all makes sense. It's not scary or unexpected, but it's just the numbers. Douglas County, however, was kind of the outlier here within the 7 metro counties that we report on, with the only month-over-month increase in active listings, but the largest decrease in sold listings, down 45% month-over-month. So a lot of people bought homes in Douglas County in December and then kind of took a decent break here in January.
Yeah.
So I think something interesting, and why we point out Douglas County and why this report is so important is real estate is local. So what's happening in Colorado is definitely different than what's happening in Wyoming or New York, but also what's happening in Douglas County is different than what's happening in Jefferson County, Adams County, or anywhere else. It's very specific. So yes, it's good to know big picture, but then also when you're making decisions for you and your family, you got to really look at what's happening in your specific area.
Well, and even as short as we are in inventory, there's certain segments of real estate that are absolutely a buyer's market right now. It's a very small segment, but there's absolutely segments that are a buyer's market. And if you don't fit into that segment, it feels like what we've been talking about. If you're in that segment, it feels worlds different, right? So again, not just down to the county, it's down to neighborhoods as to what's going on specifically.
Absolutely. Another kind of niche market that I'm interested to see this because I've also, from my perspective, seen more interest in this area in January. And I've talked to some of my colleagues and they felt the same way. So in this 200,000 to 299,000 price point, it was very popular in January with 185 active listings, 308 solds, 23 days on market was the second lowest. And but interestingly, it was one of the few price ranges to not average sold prices over asking. So what this tells me is this is an investor market for the most part. And the reason I say that is because it's a good price point as far as, getting a lot of bang for your buck and not spending a ton, but entering that real estate market. But people that are investors everyone wants a deal, but especially investors want a deal because they are even less emotionally attached. It's all about the numbers. So the fact that this is the only price point that did not have an over asking average makes complete sense to me. So I don't know, Matt, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and that price point as well being for the properties that aren't quite the investment property, right? The numbers don't work out. It's a homeowner buying. That's a first-time home buyer price point. And we look at just the small volume of homes that are kind of in that realm. They may not have the ability to go much over asking price, right? So kind of an interesting dynamic, and for somebody that fits your criteria, may have a few more options.
Yep, absolutely. So then we go over this market snapshot that we look at every month. So green is active, blue is pending or under contract, and then red is sold. So we can see that solds came down considerably in January, where pendings peaked up a little bit, and then actives just kind of decreased slower than they did, but still are coming down. So what you'll notice, though, is what we've said before, is pending kind of reflects what's to come for sold. So if you notice November to December, pending had that drop, and now sold is following a month later. So we see pendings peaked up a little bit this month. So I would anticipate to see, it makes sense, if homes are going under contract, most of those will close. So we'll see an uptick in February in those sold listings.
And watching that green line, again, the active inventory below both the red and blue line, right? So the red being the sold, the blue being the pending, that there's not too many points here over the last couple of years where that's happened. And there certainly hasn't been the longevity of that consistently happening as you look back through it. And the year over year change for active inventory, it's down 51.17%. Yep. We have half of the homes on the market that we had a year ago, which was already short in inventory.
And that's directly affecting the average sold price, which is up 17.53% year over year. So basic economics, that makes sense. Interestingly, though, on the pendings and solds, we're a little bit off, but historically, year over year, we're more in line with what we're seeing for this time of year. Pendings are a little bit off, but we're more in line with the trend. But actives, that's what's throwing a wrench in it, making it incredibly competitive. And then we're seeing all of those homes spike over asking price, just because we've got pretty much the same amount of people in the pool looking. We just have a whole lot less fish.
Yeah, and I've made this comment several times. It is like watching 5-year-olds play soccer. Everybody on the soccer field is chasing the one soccer ball. That's what the real estate market feels like, because there's one home that's popped up on the market. Everybody's bombarding to that home to go take a look.
Yep, absolutely. And this is going pretty slow. So this, again, is just active listings. Not to beat a dead horse here, but you can see this is detached and attached. Attached is a little bit more, but we are at just under 2 weeks of inventory is really what this breaks down to. So again, last year we had double and we were still depleted. So we just need those homes.
Yep. It's need homes to stay on the market just a touch longer, right? Like I said, the homes are coming on the market every day, but what comes up disappears just so very quickly.
Absolutely. And then this is month supply of inventory. So this is what I was talking about with that 2 weeks. So the National Association of Realtors says about 6 months of inventory, like 30,000 homes. Here in Denver, probably closer to 3 or 4 months of inventory. And obviously, even if we were at 2 months of inventory as a balanced market, we're still at 0.4. So just a couple days really of inventory that we have.
Yeah, and to recap that, the month supply of inventory, what we're looking at is what's called the absorption rate, is how fast the homes are selling if no new homes come on the market. So this month, nobody decided to put their home on the market in less than half a month, right? So a little less than 2 weeks, we're out of inventory. All of the homes are gone.
Yep. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about inventory in specific areas here. So we were talking about days in the MLS and that it's higher than it was in December. But again, if we look historically, we're still incredibly low, because this time of year, January is typically our slower season. We're usually in the 40s for days on market. So we're just about half of that, just under. But obviously we had a great fourth quarter, a very quick fourth quarter. So that bump does feel very significant, but we're still 36% lower than we were last year. So again, some relativity.
Well, and it's an average. So for every property that's going under contract in 6 hours, you're going to have the opposite end of that. There are homes still sitting on the market for weeks and for months. And it's not that anything is wrong per se with the house. There might be some work to be done, don't get me wrong, but it's more likely just overpriced for its current condition and its location, right? But at a certain price, every property would sell. So if it was priced correctly, a buyer would have bought it, right?
Absolutely. And, like we've discussed before, there's a lot of psychology that goes into pricing. And even in this market, people want to feel like they're getting value and getting a deal. And the deal might be getting it 10 grand over asking instead of 30. But if they see a home that's overpriced, they still acknowledge that it's overpriced. And then they go into it saying, okay, well, it's already overpriced. And then I'm going to have to go over that even more to get it, instead of, oh my gosh, this house is priced so competitively, I want it, and now I have to go overpriced. So you might end up at the same number. You might actually end up starting lower and ending up higher just because more people want it, more people see that value instead of really pushing. And to be fair, in this market, you can push the price in a lot of scenarios.
Oh yeah.
There's kind of a sweet spot of pushing the price to get enough people there, and then over pushing it to where people know that it's overpriced. They're going to wait a weekend and see if you come down or feel like they have more buying or negotiating power. So it's very interesting. And again, a lot of human psychology that goes into how people do this and why they do what they do.
Yeah, without a doubt. We spend a lot of time looking at ugly photos and chatting with our buyers and say, look, I know this house doesn't show well online. The photos are terrible. You can't get around the big oversized furniture here. Yet I've been in this house or similar floor plans, same floor plans, whatever. Trust me, this matches your criteria, and seeing luck there. So sometimes, if the pictures look really great, it looks really amazing online, everybody else sees the same thing. For a buyer, if you're willing to go look at the properties that other people aren't because the photos were poorly done, you might get an opportunity, because even let's say it was $10,000 overpriced and it had bad photos. If it was priced correctly, had good photos, they may be bidding it $30,000 over. So even if you're paying $10,000 over, when the neighbor comes up for sale, you still walked into some equity.
Yeah, bad photos are a buyer's best friend. I mean, there's a lot of people, and even personally, being in the industry and knowing, it's really hard to look past that when you're trying to imagine yourself in this home. It's really hard to get past some of those weird lighting or weird photos. And, we've seen some really funny things in listing photos, and it does deter some people, especially now in our current conditions where people are really trying to limit the homes they actually walk through. They really want to get the best sense possible online of what they're walking into. And, if you're a buyer and you can get past the weird photos, it might be a great opportunity for you.
Yeah, maybe overlook the weird photos. Now, when you get there in person, if it's really weird and it doesn't feel right, you still don't have to buy it, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Let's see here. Days in MLS. So this is actives and sold by price point. So this just breaks it down again, like we've talked about with different areas, Douglas County versus Jefferson County. There's also some different stories happening in different price points. So there's one active listing in the under 200,000 price point. And the one with the most is that 600 to 800,000. But there's also a lot of things being sold there. So this is a great one to look at, just so you can really dive into your specific budget, your specific listing price, and see how competitive things are and use it as a strategy.
Yeah. So, right, if you're a buyer in that up to 200 price point, and you don't like what you see, that's the home. That's your option right now.
Yep. Gotta wait.
And that's unfortunate. And that's where some creativity kind of comes in. What is being done to find properties that are maybe not on the market yet that might fit that criteria.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that's about, we can always go over solds, but again, solds were down for January. But if you look historically, they're pretty much right on par with what we see. So it'll be interesting to see what that February looks like if we start to go back more to the trends that we've seen. But really, the only way that that's truly going to happen is if we see an influx in active inventory.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing, right? We're repeating that we're low on inventory. Now, what I do want to share on that is I'm not expecting that to change next month or the month after that. Things happen gradually, so very gradually, and then it seems like all of a sudden we have more inventory or we have a price change or we have something, right? So as we watch every month, we're going to see what are the indicators that are starting to trend to a direction, right?
Yep.
So as we've been talking month over month about limited inventory, you and I were chatting about why are we so short on inventory? What's happened that's actually caused this? So what do you want to share?
Well, I think one thing, and I know this isn't what we're going to talk about, but I think one thing is that there's a real concern for sellers that, yeah, that's great. I can get this much money out of my house, but then where do I go? Because there's 4 homes for sale. So I think that there's some education there and some digging deeper of, okay, there actually are homes for sale. You just have to set the right expectations. And sometimes that's easier to do. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to, you have a life event happening and you don't have very long. So then that feels a lot more intense. But money is still very cheap. Interest rates are still very cheap. So there is potential for you to still come out ahead, whether it's a better home for you or a lower payment or a better location or a lower interest rate, all of those things. So yeah, it can be very scary. And the number one question I think we hear, at least I hear from sellers as an objection is, well, where are we going to go? But there are options. You do, like Matt has said, you have to think outside the box a little bit. But a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to wait for the market and I'm going to wait for this. But the market, even if we slow appreciation, very rarely are we just going to bottom out. And yes, it happened in 2008, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule. And there's a lot of different things going on there, but we're still going to, at the very least, plateau, if not appreciate, even at a slower rate. And interest rates are not going to stay this low forever. So you might be getting a home that you think is for a better deal, but you're paying more still because of the interest rate. So it's this balancing act. It's like, when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? No one has a magic crystal ball, but there's some other things to consider and kind of look outside that box when you're trying to make the best decision. And new builds is something that Matt and I wanted to talk about and kind of what that landscape has looked like and why it has, on one side, it can be a great tool for buyers that maybe have some flexibility and timing and don't want to get into that multiple offer scenario. But also new builds is a big piece of why we are so low on inventory.
Yeah, without a doubt. And before we jump in, we do have a couple of questions that came in that I want to just touch on. So the first question about, fisheye photos where the place looks bigger than it is. And that comes from experience in one of the reasons why. So most real estate agents, a lot of real estate agents will set their buyers up on an auto alert. Here's an auto alert that's every 2-bed, 2-bath house in, Arvada or Denver or whatever. Well, just because there's certain criteria that matches doesn't mean that every home's going to fit. So we actually spend a lot of time previewing the photos first, previewing those properties to say, gosh, they really like to entertain. And the photos make this look like it's a bigger place. But again, I've been in this model, I've been in this floor plan. This is not conducive for what they want to do. So one of the ways that we kind of curb a lot of that is to do a lot of the work on the front end. The other question was, and specifically directed to you, Brenna, about interest rates on USDA. But I do want to just kind of jump in. Brenna's role with the title company, you don't really deal with interest rates. We can certainly connect with some of our other lender partners about USDA, and I'll reach out to Mitch to see if we can't get an answer on that. But interest rates, a lot of variables that go into your interest rate between where you're buying, what you're buying, how you're buying, what your credit score is. So many different variables, but we'll get a better answer than that from Mitch about USDA rates.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on that, so I'll defer that question.
Yeah, and again, I'm not the expert on it either. I don't have many conversations about the rate with my buyers, mostly because we let them have that conversation with the lender. They tell me what their budget is, and we work within the confines that they give us. So, if their interest rate's 2.5%, 3.5%, it's not really my concern as to what their monthly payment is. That's why they work directly with that expert. But we do have fantastic resources to be able to get those answers. So circling back now, wanted to connect just around the new build piece. So we've worked with a number of builders over the last couple of years with helping buyers get into new builds. And it's a pretty great process when it fits. And it doesn't fit for everybody. But for the most part, builders like working with the real estate agents. We like working with the builders. And because the market's appreciating so fast right now, if you are buying a new build right now and you go under contract, there's a decent chance that by the time you close and your appraisal comes back, the builder will have had several price increases. The other similar homes, the resale homes, will have been bid up, and you may be walking into equity today where it didn't seem like that 7 to 9 months ago when you signed that contract. So but the builder piece is one that I want to share here about one reason why we're just so dramatically low on inventory. So this is U.S. housing starts. So these are new builds. And this is the 25-year trend, and it's kind of month to month, as you see. So as you're looking at this section back here into the 90s, you can see a gradual trend. If we were to draw a trend line, it was on a upward trend up until about, I'd say somewhere in 2006. And it took a steep decline. So many of these homes just were never built. So as we get around here, 2009, we start to see that actually pick back up. And the trend line, the growth line, seems to kind of mirror what it was. But I want to point out this big void here, right? This means that there were a lot of homes that were just never built, right? The builders weren't building them. And what happened to all of those homes, right?
While our population is increasing.
Right. So
Yeah.
the population's increasing. The homes were not, the new build homes were not keeping up. And they're still, as you look here where they were at, through 2020, they're not on the level that they were at back here in its peak.
And, back in the peak, maybe there was an influx because of things that were happening. But even if we were to just draw a straight line across with no growth, we're barely there. So, I've even looked at it, and especially in our area, I'm like, man, like there's builders everywhere and they're building so quickly. And it's really weird to say that, builders aren't building enough. Well, they're building at a decent trajectory. They're just starting in a pit.
Right.
And there's a lot of other factors like the cost of land, the cost of labor, everything like that, that makes it really difficult for them to keep prices competitive. And we talked last time about it being really hard for builders to build that entry level price point home because everything else is so expensive that it makes it virtually impossible. And there's some builders that have figured it out, but it's really difficult. So that is one thing. We're just still, trying to crawl out of that hole and make up for lost time with the population increase that happened over all of those years where things weren't being built.
Yeah, we're probably not going to see new builds, start overbuilding again, right? A lot of the builders got burned. The number of builders went out of business. We would like to think that we learned our lessons when things go through, but that's not always the case. But again, as we look at and these are U.S. nationwide statistics, I'm sure if we had Colorado's numbers here in a graph, they would relatively mirror what we're seeing here on a national scale.
Absolutely. And it's pretty impressive if you think about it. If you look at our little COVID crater, even for the new builds, that they were able to bounce back so quickly because they did have, they were not allowed to do inspections, or it was very difficult. They couldn't just keep their labor on, so they had to let them go. So how quickly they were able to bounce back when they basically just got, halted, stopped at a overnight.
Yeah.
That's impressive, but it's still not enough to totally help the inventory shortage.
Yeah. So for the foreseeable future, I think we're going to be in this trend. Now, again, we're watching so many different metrics that there's not one single metric that is the end all be all that says when this turns, things are going to get better. Nothing happens in a vacuum, right? All of these are influenced and impacted by other things. So, it takes time, right? We're going to see still probably the rest of this year, limited inventory and high demand. One article that I saw maybe last week, maybe the week before, and I'm drawing a blank on the source right now, but they're anticipating an 8% increase in values here in the Denver metro area for 2021. And that's double historical average.
Yeah. Yeah. We have new administration. We have, vaccines coming out. We have a new year. We have a lot of things happening in the last month. And our market is still strong. So slow, but we'll see. I think February, we're going to be off to the races again. And there's opportunity out there. You just have to think outside the box and be prepared for what you're walking into.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. So, and that really kind of covers the market that we wanted to review here for the Denver metro area for what January's numbers and figures were. Any final words of wisdom here, Brenna?
Nope. I think Denver's still a good investment. I think that's some words of wisdom.
Yeah. Well, and again, things are very individualized. So if you're a seller in this market, there's a lot of advantages. There are, truth be told, there's some disadvantages, right? If you're a buyer in this market, there's still some ways to find homes, to get into homes, right? Last year we had more homes sold than we had ever had. That means more buyers bought. So, it still can be done. It just may not be the most fun process that you've gone through, but, have a little bit of faith and we can get this done. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as always, Brenna, I so appreciate your time and land title for sharing this information out with us. And, as we look into next month, we're probably going to be very similar in the conversations, but let us know what questions you have, what you'd like to hear, and we can discuss. So.
Well, thank you for having me, and we'll see you next month.
All right, Brenna. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody, for watching.